Alright, so today I want to introduce you to the swarm ball python. The swarm consists of the spider, the enchi, and the ghost genes. And when you think of swarm, you may be thinking of a swarm of bees, and that's essentially where it gets its name. There's a whole bunch of different bee combinations in ball pythons, and all the bees contain the gene spider. And today I want to start with just the spider by itself and show you individual genes we can add to the spider to make all the different bee combinations and work all the way up to the swarm. There's actually 5 different bees I want to cover today. There's the bumblebee, the stinger bee, the honeybee, the humblebee, and the swarm. And then once we hit the swarm, we'll add a few genes to the swarm to see the true potential of the swarm. So today I want to jump over the internet and I want to show you how to make a swarm and the true potential of the swarm ball python. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here on Morphmarket.com and I want to start with the spider. This is what the spider looks like. As a matter of fact, a lot of people say that you probably shouldn't breed 2 spiders together. So if you have 2 bee combinations that contain spider, you probably shouldn't breed them together. I've seen some reports where some people have claimed that they've produced a super spider. Others have claimed that the super spiders will partially develop in the egg and then die right before they hatch. I've actually seen people pulling out dead hatchlings from the eggs, kind of cutting them open and showing what the super spiders look like. Some people, early on, people were claiming that the super spiders were an all-white snake that would die in the egg, and I've actually seen some that look like spiders. People are claiming they're super spiders. You know, to kind of be on the safe side, I would probably avoid breeding 2 spiders together just to kind of be on the safe side. And essentially the spider gets its name from this spider web pattern coming right down the top of the snake. And kind of the cool thing that I really like about the spider is that the spiders can be really bright gold, almost like a metallic gold, which is pretty awesome. Similar to the pinstripe, I'd say between the pinstripe and the spider, they're probably the 2 brightest gold genes in ball pythons. And the other thing that's really interesting about the spider is that it has almost this, looks almost like calico coming up the sides of the snake. This is actually a really low white example of a spider. I've seen some spiders where they'll have a really bright bottom half, like a bright white on the bottom part of the snake. Pretty amazing. And I've actually produced a few spiders here in my collection, and it's really variable. It seems like you can't really line breed for a high white or a low white spider. I've actually produced like a whole clutch of spiders, and you get like high white and low white all in the same clutch. I don't think you can kind of line breed for the high white and low white. It's just kind of like one of those random anomalies. You get kind of a whole mix of high white and low white. And a lot of people, when they talk about the bees in ball pythons, a lot of people think that the bee is the combination of the spider and the pastel. As a matter of fact, I was doing a video, I can't remember what bee it was a couple of weeks ago, and someone made a comment and they were like, when you're talking about bees, don't you mean the combination of the spider and the pastel to make the bee, which is kind of interesting. And one thing to keep in mind is sometimes when we're talking about bees, it includes pastel, but there are certain bee combinations, kind of the slang, that doesn't include pastel in the mix. And I kind of want to show you what a pastel looks like, and we'll make our first bee combination with the addition of pastel and spider. This is what a pastel looks like. And the pastel essentially is a yellow snake. Some can be really bright yellow and some can be pretty browned out. It really depends on the line of pastel. And the pastels, I'd say a lot of times they'll really fade, kind of brown out as they age and mature. But I've seen a lot of pastel spider combinations that really keep their brightness as they age and mature, which is pretty awesome. So if you actually take the pastel, you breed it to a spider, 25% of the time, this is what you get. You get a bumblebee. Take a look at this crazy snake. That is pretty amazing. I'd say this is probably one of the best examples of a bumblebee. As a matter of fact, I was actually looking at some old YouTube videos from like 10 years ago, or maybe like 15 years ago, something like that. And people were like freaking out. They made the very first bumblebees ever in existence. And they could not believe how amazing ball pythons could be with the addition of pastel and spider. It was like one of the big things that people were just drooling over. They just could not believe the combination. It was really crazy. As a matter of fact, they're kind of, taken advantage of now because there's so many awesome combinations. There's like hundreds of different genes and so many breathtaking combinations in ball pythons. The bumblebees are actually pretty inexpensive. This one actually sold for just $200, so not too bad for a really amazing looking bumblebee. So take a look at this. This is actually the Bumblebee with the addition of another copy of Pastel. So this is essentially the Super Pastel Spider, also known as the Killer Bee. So the Killer Bee is, you kind of get these slang names, especially when you're looking at combinations. Someone will say this is a Bumblebee with other genes in the mix, or a Killer Bee. And a lot of times you need to know the slang name to kind of figure out what genes are in the mix, and kind of backtrack depending on what the slang is for those combinations. So it's always good to know the Bumblebee and the Killer Bee. There's a lot of people that they don't separate out the the Super Pastel Spider and all the different genes in the combinations. So here is the Enchi. Everything goes better with the Enchi, and essentially what Enchi does is it really reduces the pattern, and it's pretty amazing what Enchi does to a lot of combinations. It's pretty much universal. It's one of the most common genes in all of ball pythons, and a lot of times the Enchi will really bring out a lot of orange color in a lot of your combinations, which is pretty awesome. So here's what happens if you take Enchi and work it into the Spider. You get the Stinger Bee, which is pretty awesome. This is the combination of the Enchi. And essentially what the Enchi does is it really reduces the pattern of the Spider. And I'd say sometimes it's really difficult to tell if Enchi is really in the mix, because sometimes the Spider can be really reduced by itself, and sometimes the Spider can really reduce it where you can definitely tell the Enchi is in the mix. And kind of the interesting thing about this is the Stinger Bee, but you'll notice on this one there's no pastel, even though we're calling it a bee combination. So sometimes you'll have pastel and sometimes you won't have pastel in the mix. So here is the hypo. The hypo is also the ghost. So the hypo is kind of the slang name for ghost. Ghost is actually a recessive gene. You need 2 copies of the ghost for a visual. And essentially what the ghost does is it really kind of smooths out the contrast of the snake. As a matter of fact, there's different versions of the ghost. Some of them are a lot more orange than other versions. There's actually a ghost called the orange ghost, which is kind of the orange version, but there's definitely some overlap between the ghost and the orange ghost. There's some ghosts that I've seen that are really orange, and some orange ghosts that are not quite as orange as some of the orange versions of just the regular ghost, which is kind of crazy. So here's what happens if you were a ghost into the Spider. Take a look at this. This is actually called the honeybee. And the honeybee, if you actually take a look at the genes, this is just the Spider and the ghost. This is actually another bee combination without the pastel. Sometimes it can kind of trick you with all these bees. You're kind of scratching your head. All right, is there pastel in there or not? And this is just the combination of Spider and ghost. As a matter of fact, if you actually take a look at this one, this almost looks like one of the orange versions of the ghost. So let me tell you, I'm thinking about at some point getting into orange ghost. I absolutely love the orange colored ghost combinations. It just kind of gives you a really kind of like a creamy appearance with it brings in a lot of orange in a lot of combinations, which is really amazing. So take a look at this one. This is also kind of the spin-off of the last one. This is the humblebee. So you have the honeybee and then the humblebee. And the only difference between the two is in the humblebee, you're adding pastel to the mix. So this is the combination of the Spider and the ghost. And then when you add the pastel, it transitions the honeybee into the humblebee. And sometimes I'd say it's hard to tell if you actually have pastel in a lot of your Spider combinations. Sometimes it's really obvious, especially if you have a whole clutch of offspring and you're kind of comparing side by side. But sometimes you can have different degrees of the bright yellow color from the different genes coming together. So sometimes it's kind of hard to tell, but that is a really amazing combination. So take a look at this. This is what we were building up to the whole time. This is what is known as the swarm. So this is the Enchi's Spider Hypo. Essentially what the swarm is it's a combination of it's actually the honeybee and the stinger bee kind of combined into one. Just take a look at how amazing that is. Pretty amazing combination. And look at the head on that thing. That is pretty amazing. As a matter of fact, I was wondering the price on this one. This one, look at that. It's only $225. And the reason the price is so low is because the Spider, the Enchi, and the Ghost have been around for a really long time, since the beginning, and there's a whole bunch of them out there. So, usually it's a supply and demand thing. If there's a really large supply, and sometimes even if there's a really large demand, sometimes the prices will be pretty reasonable. So that is, as a matter of fact, $225. That's a pretty amazing price, since you have this many genes with a recessive. So you'd have to breed this to like a ghost ghost or a het ghost to reproduce it. It's a little bit harder to hit. So if you bred this to a normal, essentially what you get is you would get stinger bees that are all het for ghost because you need 2 copies of the ghost. That is a pretty amazing combination. So here's the pinstripe. I actually wanted to show you a few more genes mixed into the swarm so you can kind of see what happens to the swarm when you mix in some genes. So the pinstripe, I'd say, is sometimes it can be pretty variable. Some of them are a little bit browned out and some of them are super bright gold. And I think a lot of it depends maybe on the lines of pinstripe and maybe it depends on the age of the pinstripe. It seems like the younger the pinstripes are, the more bright gold they are. And the pinstripe usually has a really strong stripe right down the back of the snake. So here's what happens if you take pinstripe and you work it into a swarm. This is what you get. You get a swarm pinstripe. that is a pretty amazing combination. And the weird thing about this is you can definitely see the pinstripe is really visually dominant, almost dominates all the other genes in the mix. You can definitely see the influence of the pinstripe, and then you actually have enchi, which reduces the pattern of the pinstripe into these little spots, and then you have the ghost, which really kind of fades it out. And as a matter of fact, you can almost hardly even see the spider in the mix because everything else is kind of changing the pinstripe. That is a pretty amazing combo. So if you actually look at the genes, this is the spider, the pinstripe, the enchi, and the ghost. So here is the butter. As a matter of fact, I just did a video about the butter versus the lesser. Are they the same thing? And I pretty much came to the conclusion that the butter and lesser are different. They're really close. They're both part of the blue-eyed leucistic complex, but I think some butters can be a lot brighter than some of the lessers. Some lessers can be a lot darker than some of the butters, but you'll have a lot of butters and lessers that look almost exactly the same, and that is where a lot of confusion can kind of come in between the butter and the lesser. So here's what happens if you take butter and work it into a swarm. Take a look at this. You get the enchi butter humblebee, which is pretty awesome. And if you actually look, a lot of these combinations will have these slang names. So the humblebee, remember the humblebee is actually a spin-off of the honeybee. So the honeybee is the spider and the ghost. And remember, when we add pastel to the honeybee, we get the humblebee. So essentially what this is the butter pastel swarm. So it has 2 additional genes besides the swarm. Sometimes it can get really confusing with all the slang names, especially with all the genes like this. You try to breed it to something else, it's really hard to actually hit these combinations because there's so many genes. But just take a look at what that does to the combination here. That is a really amazing combination. So here is the Mojave. The Mojave is also in the blue-eyed leucistic. It's similar to lesser, except it's a standalone morph. It's definitely darker than the lesser. And when you work Mojave into other genes in the blue-eyed leucistic, a lot of times you'll end up with a purple snake, with like the purple passion or the mystic potion versus the lesser. Usually the lessers will always give you a white snake, breeding it into other genes in the blue-eyed leucistic complex. So here's what happens if you take the Mojave and you work it into the swarm. Take a look at this. This is the hypo, enchi, Mojave, bumblebee. you see, you get a lot of these names like the bumblebee kind of transferring over. And take a look at what the Mojave did to this. Pretty amazing. So if you actually take a look at kind of the slang names at this, the hypo, remember the hypo is the same as the ghost. Then you have the enchi, the Mojave, and the bumblebee is the combination of the pastel and the spider. So essentially what this is the Mojave pastel swarm, or the Mojave pastel is also called the pastavi. So this is like a pastavi swarm. The common names kind of make your head spin with all the different names and all the different genes in these combinations. That is pretty amazing combination. All right, so this is the last one I want to show you. This is the banana, and the banana is extremely visually dominant when you work it into other combinations. Usually banana in combinations, you could definitely see the influence of banana in the mix. And here's what happens if you take the banana and you work it into the swarm. Take a look at this crazy snake. This is the banana honeybee enchi, and take a look at the visual appearance of this. I'd say this is probably one of my favorite combinations. And kind of the interesting thing about this, if you actually look kind of at the common names, jeans. This actually contains the honeybee, and remember the honeybee is the combination of the spider and the ghost, along with the enchi and the banana. So this is really the banana swarm. This is, you know, with no other jeans in the mix. If you actually take a look at the jeans on this one, the banana and the enchi. As a matter of fact, I did a video on the banana enchi combination, and then usually when you mix banana and enchi, it's really visually dominant and really visually stunning. It works really well with a lot of combinations. Probably my favorite two jeans working together, the banana and the enchi. And you can definitely see the banana color on the top, and then the enchi really reducing the pattern. And then when you work spider into the mix, it really kind of jumbles up the pattern even more, kind of bringing these stripes down with the spider and bringing the white up on top of the, you know, kind of halfway up the snake. You can see this is pretty much a high white spider. Pretty impressive combination. Sometimes you can get a low white spider, and then you have ghost on top, which kind of fades out. As a matter of fact, I would think this is probably like the orange ghost version of ghost, kind of giving it like an orange color to the banana, which is usually pretty yellow. And look at the price on this one. This is I can't even believe this one's only $200. Pretty amazing combination. As a matter of fact, that can't be right. That's I don't know. I don't think that's priced right, because usually just the bananas by itself are about $250. That is pretty amazing. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And MMA Trend asks, what time of the year should I pair up my ball pythons? And that is a very good question. So what I do every single year when I'm pairing up my males and females, I pair them up on October 15th. That's just the hard set date that I pair up every year. I'd say most people usually pair up their ball pythons between October and November, sometimes even into early December. And essentially what that does is it allows you to keep pairing up your ball pythons usually through the winter and the spring, and then they ovulate early spring, and then they lay eggs early summer. And then it's like a 2-month wait for those eggs to hatch. And usually after you hatch those eggs and then give them a few meals, usually by the fall, you have some ball python hatchlings that are ready to sell. And everyone pretty much has most of their ball python hatchlings ready to sell at the fall shows. It's kind of one big crazy event, the shows in the falls. And I've actually seen people, you know, with huge warehouses of ball pythons. And what they do is they rotate their breeding schedule. You can breed ball pythons any time of the year. Some people have this rotating schedule. Well, they'll take a certain amount of snakes and breed them like every month or something like that, where they constantly have hatchlings at every single show, which is pretty amazing. And a lot of times you get to some of these spring shows and you'll see just a few really big breeders that are kind of rotating their breeding cycle, and they're pretty much the only ones that have hatchlings that are for sale. Most people I'd say at the spring shows, they pretty much have, you know, some of the stuff left over that was from last year, which sometimes it can be a really good deal because people want to unload it. And sometimes it's the higher end combinations and higher end jeans that they didn't sell the following year, and they have a little bit of size. I'd say you can do pretty good in the spring as far as some deals, but as far as the variety of hatchlings that you can get, you know, the fall shows really can't be beat. It's pretty amazing. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.